Were there dinosaurs on the ark?
I have never thought about that.
I've so been looking forward to this conversation, Ryan. You're the host and the creator of Kinda Christian. And this is a podcast and a show that is out there to seek answers. And you talk with top scholars and experts. So, kind of talk to me about the crux of what the show is and how you came up with the idea.
Well, I'd like to think it's like, I mean, on one hand, it's like really original, right? Like I've got the same questions that everyone's been wrestling with in religion for the last 5,000 years. So I'm not on the illusion that I personally will get to solve all of them. But, originally it actually started through quarantine. There wasn't a lot to do and I was inside a lot. And, quarantine kind of makes you have a lot of time to think. And so I was sitting there just going, I can't do any of the other projects that I'd like to work on right now, but I do like, the other 200 million Americans have Zoom. And I thought, well, why not dig into something that's been kind of a passion project for a long time. So I've always, much to the frustration of pastors, had a ton of questions. It's good and bad, but I've never been one to just accept what I'm told. You can ask my parents that. And I just want to, why is it the way it is? And you push and like, because, and then one day I just realized, I believe certain things, but I don't know if I believe them just because I've been told them over the years, or if I actually believe them. And this transcends religion. This is just across the board for everything. I'm really, really started getting into why as humans do we believe what we believe in general? Is it because someone told us because we were raised that way, or because we've actually dug in? So I thought, well, I'm really fortunate to just through circumstance in life happen to be 1 or 2 degrees away from some of the top theologians and scholars. And I thought, what the heck, I'll bother them. I know they're home right now for quarantine. So let's ask them the tough questions. And they were nice enough to let me sit down. So each episode just turned into a focus of a major question that I've had. And I just put my beliefs on the table and said, let's start from scratch and see what I actually come to.
Tell me some of the examples of the experts and scholars that you've been talking to, and can you share some of the topics that you've been covering so far?
Totally. So I come into this mostly as like recreationally. I'm just fascinated. Religion in general just fascinates me. I think it's interesting. Every culture has religion. And with Kinda Christians, like I was raised kind of Christian actually. So it wasn't really a big deal when I didn't have to go to church. My parents like, you probably should, because that's what you're supposed to do. And so I thought, well, I'll start, one thing you do is when you meet these top scholars, the first thing you learn is how woefully unintelligent you are compared to them. Because regardless of, I think a lot of people think of religion and they think, oh, it's like a bunch of pseudoscience and a bunch of weird beliefs. But when you get to people who have multiple PhDs or doctorates and you ask them questions and they're like, is that really your question? And I was like, oh no, I'm fine. You actually worked this out. So that was my first thing, was humbling, is how much I feel like sometimes there's this view that science and religion are completely at odds with each other, and you can't be, there's a perception that somehow if you're buying into religion, you somehow bought into this like fairy tale. And then you talk to people who have PhDs from Harvard and go out and do this research, and you're like, it's not a fairy tale to them. They're like, this is a real thing. So I think first and foremost, everyone wants to know is you want to dive into, okay, does the Bible have errors in it, right? Now that's an example of something where if you had asked me, because I was always told, yeah, like the Bible's all true. And I'd go, sure, that makes sense. Like you either believe it or you don't. And then I just had a lot of questions. You start learning and you dig around, you're like, there's actually like contradictions, in the Gospels alone. Not massive things, but they'll say, even the crucifixion story of Christ is different in John than it is in the other 3 Gospels. And so you go, huh. Or, it says he was here one day or here another day, and they both have different accounts of it. So you go, all right, well, are those errors? I don't know. So that's been the first one to dig into. So we got to sit down with Dr. Craig Keener, who's one of the foremost New Testament scholars. And it was illuminating. He says, look, if you saw a traffic accident and you had 4 different people recording their events of it, you might get 4 completely different accounts. And then he said some of the things can be explained and others can't. And so that has actually led me to be much more open-minded and just realize I actually don't know as much as I thought I did, which is good for everybody. So that was the big one, is does the Bible have errors in it? That's a fun one to dig into, and you'll get different answers across the board.
Well, and I love that you talked about the language, because like anything, if I'm going to go have a biotech conversation, or if I'm going to go have an engineering conversation, there's a different language that they're speaking because they're so, equipped within that field. So within your podcast, are you able to break it down to us that somebody with zero background could still understand?
Absolutely. I mean, so that's the whole point, was like, we're putting everything on the table here. We're actually saying, look, we're starting from scratch, because honestly, I realize like I have a lot of things that I haven't worked out. And this is something that's so important to so many people. And so let's just start from the ground up. So it was designed with like, go back to square one. We had a very prominent Old Testament scholar on a couple weeks ago. And the first question was, look, what is the Old Testament? Can you actually and he joked it was a big book. And I said, thank you. Like, I got that. But like, is it a story? I mean, you go back and you realize you don't know a lot. I didn't know a lot about this. Like, is it one book? Is it many books? Is it one continuous story? There's so many layers to it. And then you get into like, we don't even speak the original language of it. You start getting into that and you find layers of meaning, regardless of whether you think it's true or not, that are just fascinating. And it gets really interesting. So my goal was that anyone could come to this and be like, try and be the questions that you might have had if you've ever gone to church and you've never been able to ask the pastor. There's usually a long line to visit the pastor after a service. And so he doesn't want to be asked, probably, what are your thoughts on Genesis right after a service? So I thought, why not corner them online and see if we could actually ask them like the tough questions.
Well, and that's so great, because a lot of times we do have a lot of these questions and you feel like once you've passed a certain point, you should just know. And then we don't want our faces attached to it. We'd rather have you do the tough work for us and ask were there dinosaurs on the ark. I love that.
Oh, that's right. That was a big one for me. I had never thought about that. The best is the actual debate that is going on one of our Facebook pages. Is someone posted, no way you could fit a T-Rex on the ark. Right, which I think is probably a good point. On the other hand, someone responded and said, bro, what if it was two baby T-Rexes, right? And I thought, that's the kind of scholarship I'm really looking forward to illuminating for everybody.
So there's conversations at every level, which I love. And one that was fascinating to me is miracles. I feel like I see miracles all the time, but are they the miracles that we see in the Bible? And you recently spoke with a Harvard PhD that had medical research that supported miracles. Can you share a little bit about this?
Oh yeah, that's Dr. Candy Brown. She's amazing and one of the most fascinating interviews I've ever done. So I personally have always just been fascinated by just miracle stories. I mean, who doesn't want to know that, cool things can happen, right? And that transcends every religion. Like honestly, go out and talk to your family members. Everyone's got a story of something where they're like, we use that in our phrase, right? It was a miracle, right? But sure enough, there's actual medical research done on miracles. And I thought, I have to learn about this. And she's the most friendly person ever. And I reached out because if you go online, you can look at the Southern Medical Journal. And there it is. She went with a team of researchers to go work with Heidi Baker down in Mozambique, because there are all these rumors of people who were getting prayed for and receiving eyesight and hearing back. And I thought that's incredible. Like, what's going on there? She went down there and actually tested them. And one thing that's interesting about eyesight and hearing is it's not really subject to placebo. You can take a hearing test, so raise your hand when you hear the noise and you go, but if the noise didn't play, you can think you're healed, but you're not. So it's not like back pain where, you could maybe think you're healed and not. This is, you can see or you can't. And she found with a very large number of people who were prayed for that they went from being what we would consider legally blind and deaf to being able to hear fully or mostly or see mostly after receiving this prayer. And she was very specific, like, look, we don't know this is God. We just know something's happening here that violates a current medical understanding of what we have. And so that's one study, but it's fascinating and it's peer reviewed and it's great. So I encourage, like, if anyone needs hope, like, there's stuff out there like that. And I hear lots of stories from people and I go, they can't all be crazy. Some are, but they can't all be crazy,
So true. Well, and there's so many topics that you can cover. I mean, this is endless and endless conversations. The Bible has been around for such a long time and is part of the fabric of so many people's lives and being introduced to a lot more, especially now during quarantine where you're having time to kind of reflect on who you are and what your purpose is in life and, you know, maybe what your calling was. So I'm curious as to some of the topics you might be diving into the future. Spiritual giftings, or I know you did do one that was talking about callings and if you could miss it. These are fascinating conversations.
Yeah, so the calling in one is really interesting. That's something I personally have always wrestled with because that's I think as humans, we all want to believe that, there's a special mission and purpose just for us, right? And so if that is true, can you miss out on that is a terrifying proposition to consider. And so it's one of my favorite questions to ask. It's actually of all our listeners, that's probably the number one thing that we get asked is like, is there something that I'm supposed to do? Because the next generation is, the purpose generation. So, what am I supposed to do? That matters far more is what should I do with my life versus how much money can I earn? And I actually, much to my chagrin, the universal consensus has been you absolutely can miss out. So I was sort of hoping that, these theologians would come back and say, don't worry about it. You can't miss out. Everything's great. But they said, obviously we have free will, we have actions, and those actions and choices have consequences. So that's been really interesting to walk through. And I just think I again, going back to it, the more I talk with these folks, the more I realize how wrong I've been on a lot of things. So it's really kind of gotten me into a place where I'm very happy. I'm very open about my beliefs now, because when you realize there are brilliant people who come at these things with completely different perspectives, it's like, who am I to now say that I have it all worked out? And I now shudder looking back at the absolute just certainty that I would utter certain statements, about things. And now I go, man, I didn't know anything.
Talk to me about the formats that we can catch your show on. Where can people listen to your podcast? Where can people watch?
So like 5 billion other shows, you can check us out on YouTube. But you can listen to all the places where you find podcasts. So Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, you name it, your friend's phone, if you're embarrassed to have it on your phone, whatever. But it's available anywhere podcasts are found. There we are. And it's been an awesome journey.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. I feel like we're going to need to kind of check in with you regularly and
see where I'm at.
Yeah. And hear some more of these topics and maybe even open it up so some of your viewers could write in and tell you what they want to hear about.
We encourage everyone to reach out. Like, 'cause honestly, we get most of our questions from listeners, and people say, would you ask that person that question or push back on that? So we love it. If there's a question that's missing, we need to hear it. Like, I will let people know if we find an answer to T-Rexes being babies or actual large T-Rexes on the ark.
I love it. Well, I've got a few questions I'm going to send your way. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Kelly.